And welcome to Act One, a Canadian take on news events. I'm your host, Gordy Canuck. With me, as is normally the case, Candy the Wonder Dog. Come on up. Candy starts out all my videos. You used to call her the Wonder Pup. Now she's the Wonder Dog. And 5 years old. She joined the family on March 18th of 2020 at the start of the COVID insanity. And the way I start is I make her jump through some hoops and she gets a little treat. Shake a paw, lay down, speak. Oh, a good bark tonight, finally. Quite often she just chuffs. At any rate, it is Saturday, the 1st of August, 2025. And tonight I'm going to be talking about mass migration, what is sometimes called replacement theory or great replacement theory. And if you haven't heard of that before, you can do a Google on it. You can do a Goog, and you can see that there's something of a conspiracy theory out there in the ether, certainly on the internet, which is postulating that there is a move afoot by globalist forces, by government forces, to replace, quote unquote, the white race with other other racial groups and to inundate Canada, the United States, Western Europe, traditionally countries that are predominantly Caucasian. And then the final point, so mass migration, great replacement or replacement theory. And the last point is the war on Christianity or the war on Christians. And I do believe that there is some connective tissue between these 3 points, between these 3 issues. The first is mass migration. And are we in a period, and I'm going to be speaking from a Canadian perspective because I'm Canadian, reference off my shoulder there. My left shoulder probably looks like it's on the right. I'm a Canadian. I born and raised, although I did spend 10 years of my youth as a Canadian, living as a Canadian in the United States. I spent 10 years growing up in New York City, New Jersey, and Portland, Oregon. However, we moved permanently back to Canada the summer that I was turning 12. And anyway, um, mass migration. How is this manifesting itself in Canada? We have a new government, a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and what he has said is that he is going to limit the number of temporary foreign workers and other classes of immigrants to under 5%. The max is going to be 5% of the overall Canadian population. And that's a significant number. That 5%, currently Canada's population is up in and around, well, it's over 40 million now. I think we're coming up to 41, in and around 41 million. At 40 million, 2% is 2 million people a year. 2 million people a year coming into this country. That is a population equivalent to many of our provinces. Saskatchewan is in and around 1 million people. Manitoba's in and around 1 million people. If you go out to the East Coast, there are Newfoundland, I think, is around 500,000. I'm just going off the top of my head right now. I think Nova Scotia is around 800,000. So you're talking about adding a population the size of a province every year to Canada. I see that Kojay Malik has shown up. Kojay Malik, of course, has been on the stream many times before. She is down in Florida. I am in Canada. Anyone watching the live stream, please fill up the live chat like Kojay Malik has done. I appreciate that. I enjoy the engagement. It animates me. At any rate, that is an insane level of newcomers coming into the country, as far as I'm concerned. And it strikes me that Mark Carney, Canada's Liberal Prime Minister of Canada, that what he is doing is by putting it forward and saying we're going to cap immigration at 5% of total population. It creates the impression, oh, it's a cap. A cap. A cap is a good thing. A cap means a limit. A cap means, we're capping it. It makes it sound like it's being reduced. But 2 million a year is insanely high in my estimation. Now, to be clear, Canada, like much of the Western developed world, needs immigrants. Full stop. Our fertility rate in this country is, I believe it's less than 1.4. At most, it is 1.4. And what that means, fertility rate is an expression of how many children each woman in the population gives birth to, how many kids each woman in the population gives birth to on average over the course of their childbearing years. And if a population is to maintain itself at a steady level, little up, little down, but just basically maintaining the status quo, you need a fertility rate of about 2.1. Canada, we're somewhere in and around 1.4, significantly less than what is required just to maintain the population. So, without immigration, our population would go into decline. The number of older people would grow, and the number of younger people coming up in behind them to provide taxation, to provide the services that elderly people need. We would be in the soup, for lack of a better expression. So, immigration is absolutely needed. Canada can expect to have in and around 300 and some odd thousand people dying each and every year. That's current levels. Current levels, 320, 330,000, somewhere and around there. That's how many Canadians are expected to die. Then, likewise, you have people leaving the country. People go down to the US, they go to Europe, they go to the Middle East, they emigrate out to other parts of the country. Let's see what Koji Malik is asking. What would happen if there were less people in the world? The world did okay when there weren't as many people here. We're living in the greatest time. If you think about the quality of living, standard of living, planet-wide, the reason that we have 8+ billion people on the planet right now is because we're living in a time of plenty and abundance. And so that has enabled the world's population to grow exponentially. And there are those who argue that 8 billion, that it is unsustainable. We hear this word a lot, sustainability. The UN has come out, the United Nations has come out with what they call the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs for short. And the SDGs, there are 17 of them, and the thinking behind these 17 Sustainable Development Goals is that the Earth is running out of resources, that we cannot continue to have this many people living at this standard of living, because what's going to happen is the planet, we're going to deplete all the planet's resources. It is argued, I read a paper that was published by the University of Texas, and there were other corresponding studies that indicate this is what their research says. I don't agree with it, but their conclusion is that the Earth only produces enough sustainable resources, renewable resources, to sustain a population of in and around 1.9 billion people over the long term. And A reasonable question might be, well, wait a minute. If the planet only renews, the resources renewing each year are only enough to sustain 1.9 billion, how did we ever get to 8 or 8 plus? And the argument put forward is that the Earth had, past tense of the verb, significant reserves built up. However, over the last, I don't know how many decades, over the last century, whatever the case, we've been tapping into those reserves, and now those reserves are close to being depleted. And that unless we make radical changes, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2035, unless we make radical changes in a very short period of time, certainly historically, 5 years, very short window, that the world is heading to privation. We'll run out of water, we'll run out of oil, we'll run out of everything. And I want to highlight something. There was a theory that came out in the late 90s, sometime in the 1990s. This theory came out called peak oil, and it's scientifically studied and proven at the time that the planet's capacity to produce oil in and around the year 2000, that the demand for oil was going to surpass the ability of oil and gas exploration to meet that demand. It was called peak oil. So our production was ramping up, demand was ramping up, but they said around the year 2000, we will hit a maximum of available oil that can be exploited, but demand is going to keep going up, and then the available supply is going to start to fall off, and we're going to be in the soup. We have to develop solar power. We have to develop electric cars. We have to do all these things because there simply is not enough oil to produce the gasoline and other products needed. And here it is, a quarter of a century later, 2025, and we keep finding new sources of oil. And likewise, I think my own personal non-expert opinion, which I consider to be as valid as any expert opinion, because the experts are always wrong. All the climate predictions are always wrong. All the peak oil theory was proven wrong. So just because an expert predicts something doesn't mean it's going to come true. So what's Koji Malik saying? We have all this technology and still need as many people. Who is to determine, and here's a big question, who determines who gets to have children? Who's to determine who gets to reproduce? Do you want to live in a Chinese type society when they had their one child policy? Sorry, you're only allowed one child, although I'm sure senior members of the Communist Party were probably able to get around that. And there is this, the whole sustainable development goal and this whole overpopulation story that is foisted upon us, particularly in the mainstream. It preaches a message of scarcity. And this is where my Christian faith comes in, big, huge, massively, is that the gospel is news of abundance, but man likes scarcity. Human beings, broken, fallen, narcissistic, evil to our core, are always trying to promote this idea that there's not enough to go around and you better get yours. Koji Malik goes on to say, less people equals less depletion. There's plenty. There is plenty to go around. That is the gospel good news in my worldview. There is plenty to go around. what happens is we have human beings, certain human beings, who seek to own, control, and limit that supply in order to create a narrative of scarcity, which creates fear, and people who are scared and fearful are far easier to control. Uh, and Koji Malik is making the point that we need to be better keepers of what we had. I won't disagree with you on that point. We are called to be stewards of this wondrous creation and to look after it. But this idea that we're running out of water, running out of oil, running out of natural gas, running out of this, running out of that, uh, that is a human invention. And Kojimel goes on to write, I grew so much food on a quarter of an acre. It's human greed that uses food as a tool for power. Absolutely. Uh, absolutely. You know, create the illusion of scarcity to scare people into handing over their rights, into handing over their freedoms. And what we have now, I want to tie this back into these three central themes of mass migration, so-called replacement theory, and the war on Christianity. Because I do genuinely believe that mass migration into countries like Canada, it was happening in your country, the United States, under the Biden administration, certainly. This idea of open borders and caravans of people storming in with very little control over it. And what ends up happening, I'm losing, pardon me while I plug back in. There we go. Don't want to. This idea of scarcity is used as a means of control. Sorry, when I lose my train of thought, it takes me a second to get back on track. Uh, so we get in Canada, we have 2 million a year. That's going to be the cap. And that cap is not going to come into play until I think the year is 2027, 2025, 26. They can go on cap. The cap is 20. Britain, you look at France, and what you're seeing is the erosion of traditional Western European identity, Western European culture, Canadian culture, American culture. And I think there's a cautionary tale for people on this side of the Atlantic to look at what happened to the indigenous First Nations peoples of the Americas, in particular North America. Look what happened to the indigenous people of Canada and the United States. They were overrun, and their languages, their cultural identity, their religious practices, and everything was just wiped off. It's a game of numbers. And what's happening now is Canada in, I'm going to fixate on Canada. Canada is 2 million a year, 2 million a year is an insane level of immigration when maybe 400,000, maybe 500,000, enough to replace the people dying and the people who are leaving the country. But we certainly don't need 4 or 5 times the number of people dying and leaving the country. So why do this? Why have it insanely high so that Canada probably by the time we get to 2035, Canada could be approaching a population of 50 million. And Canadians, we have a tendency to measure ourselves against our American neighbors, our friends to the south, and I still call the Americans are still my friends. I'm not in on oh, this elbows up moronic rhetoric that we're hearing from from the political talking heads. Got no use for it. Uh, well, Canadians tend to fixate and we compare ourselves to the United States. The United States has a population getting up in and around 350 million. And so there's a tendency for Canada to think, oh, we have a very small population. However, if you put Canada into Europe, we would be a medium-sized country. We'd be far bigger than Sweden. Sweden's about 10 million people. Belgium's about 10 million people. We'd be 4 times bigger than Sweden or Belgium. You could put those two European countries together, and we'd still be double their population, probably more. Finland, 4 or 5 million. Norway, 4 or 5 million. We would be a medium-sized population in Europe. We'd be in the top half. But because we look to the US and we look to the South and we see 350 million, we think we're so small. We're not. The simple fact of the matter is that the geography of Canada, reality is that, yes, we're a huge landmass, but a lot of that land, no one wants to live on it because no one wants to freeze 7, 8, 9, or even 10, 11 months of the year. So uh, I'm not going to go on too late tonight because it's already 11, coming up on 11:23. And Koji Malik is the only one right now. There are a number of people watching. You're more are welcome to fill in the chat, but otherwise I'm going to wrap it up pretty quick. What I think we are witnessing happening is an entitled, enriched, constitutionally driven society has high expectations. And so, what they are doing, in my view, is they're opening the doors to massive levels of immigration into Canada, people who are coming from other parts of the world where human rights are not as respected as they are here in the West. This notion of an unalienable or inalienable rights of God-given rights doesn't have the same traction that it does in Canadian, American, Western European society. A lot of people are coming from countries that are ruled by dictatorships or by kingdoms. If people coming from the Middle East are often, if they're Jordanian, if they're Saudi, if they're Syrian, they're either being, ruled by a king, an emir, or by a dictator like a Bashir al-Assad, who has been replaced by a new dictator in Syria. And so they're coming over here. They're not used to the same rule of law that we have here. But they're thrilled to come. And because reliable electricity is seen as a luxury, running water right into the house. This is amazing. This is a luxury. If I cannot express myself, my views, be they political, religious, or otherwise, well, big deal. I couldn't do that back in my home country anyway, in my country of origin. And so I think there's a definite move afoot to bring people in to Canada, and again, the rest of the Western world, to basically inundate the population so that by and large, we become a society that is far easier to control, that will accept surveillance, will accept living in the surveillance state. And also, and this is the final point, there's a war on Christianity. There is a war on Jesus Christ. There is a war going on to diminish and marginalize and ultimately eliminate the Christian faith. I will not be surprised in my own native country if in the coming years we could see the Bible deemed to be illegal. You're not allowed to read this book. The powers that be will declare this is hate speech. If you espouse a biblical view on marriage, sexuality, gender, well, that's hateful, but it's what the Bible teaches. Well, then the Bible is hateful. And we've seen a little bit of that with this guy, Sean Foyt. and that is how you pronounce his name. Feucht, but it's pronounced Foyt, like Hoyt. Sean Foyt is an American Christian missionary of sorts who leads worship services all over the place. I think he's been around the world. He's been all over the United States. He says that he's been touring Canada for the last 20 years, leading worship services and uh, prayer events, etc. And this time, he was associated with MAGA, Make America Great Again. And that was all over the press in Canada, was to associate Sean Foyt with the MAGA movement and thus link him to Donald Trump in order to diminish his. I mean, he's spreading the gospel good news of Jesus Christ. Is he doing it perfectly? Is he doing it, you know, he's sharing God's word. And by labeling him MAGA, it with the political environment in our world right now, there's a definite move afoot to associate anyone in my country, Canada, anyone who professes Jesus Christ as Lord is. Do not be surprised. We are going to be accused of being MAGA supporters of part of the Trump camp. And they're trying to link Donald Trump and Christianity. And those two things are miles apart. There's an ocean between Jesus Christ and Donald Trump. Whale Oil Beef is here and is watching at double speed to try and catch up. Good to have you here, brother. Whale Oil is all the way out in beautiful British Columbia on Canada's west coast. So there is a move afoot to associate Christianity with Donald Trump. And right now, Canada, you watch the nightly newscasts, and they might as well just say he is the devil incarnate. And so by linking Trump to Christianity, man, oh man, I was asked by Sharunian, who's another frequent watcher of the podcast, Sharunian Allegiance, that's his username. He had asked me my thoughts on Hulk Hogan passing away. And I don't have many. I know who Hulk Hogan is. I watched him as a kid, in my younger days, always aware of him. He's certainly a cultural icon. And CBC just published a piece talking about Hulk Hogan being a heel in the game of professional wrestling, WWE, and every other brand of wrestling. This is as old as wrestling itself. There are two main roles. There is a face, and a face is a hero, the good guy. And then there's a heel, and the heel is the bad guy. And Hulk Hogan started out as a face. And then when he left Vince McMahon's WWE, WWF, when he left and he went to work for Ted Turner's WCW, he created an offshoot character. He became Hollywood Hogan, and he was part of the NWO, the New World Order, and that was I can't remember the names of the other guys who were with him, but they were all a bunch of bad guys, cheating and everything. And he turned heel. And this CBC News article was trying to say not only was Hulk Hogan a bad guy in the ring when he was Hollywood Hulk Hogan as a heel, but that he was a heel in real life. And you talk about speaking ill of the dead. That just struck me. Now, it must be remembered that at the Republican National Convention, when they nominated Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee for president of the United States. There are a number of individuals who spoke. Um, I can't remember all the names. Tucker Carlson was one. Kid Rock sang a song. There were others. Dana White of Ultimate Fighting Club, UFC, MMA. He spoke, and so did Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan became a Trumper. And but interestingly, also you can watch Hulk Hogan in interviews in the last few years, interviews with people like Joe Rogan, and he was also he professed Jesus Christ as Lord, would often wear a John 3:16 t-shirt for God so loved the world. And and now they're trying to trash on Hulk Hogan, which I find incredibly disgusting to do that when someone is dead. Hulk Hogan was flawed, like every human being is flawed. Was Christians do not worship Sean Foyt. We do not worship Donald Trump. We do not worship Hulk Hogan. We worship Jesus Christ. He is Lord. It is to He that we bend the knee and confess with our tongues that He is Lord. We don't make that same profession about followers of Christ, because if we're honest with ourselves, we recognize that, hey, I recognize I'm a broken, fallen, sinful creature. I don't want anyone following me. I want others following the Lamb of God, Jesus Christ, the man who led the perfect, sinless life, who was God incarnate, come down from glory. That's who people need to follow, not Hulk Hogan, not Donald Trump, not Sean Foyt, not anyone else, not Russell Brand. There are a lot of celebrities now making professions of faith in Jesus Christ. Well, and that's all well and good, but that's not who people are to worship. Worship is reserved for the Son. And how do I tie this all back in? We have an opportunity. A lot of the people coming into Canada are coming from they're non-Christians. And I think that is by design. Absolutely 100%. I do think it is by design. I also think the reason why so many members of the Islamic faith are coming into Canada, I equally think that is by design. A lot of these Islamic countries are authoritarian ruled, where the rules are whatever the leader says it is. If you have people coming from Iran, they're being subjected to Sharia law, and they're coming into Canada, and birth rates among certainly among members of the Islamic faith are far significantly higher than those of older generation Canadian, 1.4, whereas quite often quite large. And what you have is a recipe for diminishing, and eventually, I think the goal is to eventually eliminate the Christian faith within the nation state of Canada. And as a means toward having a population that is far easier to manipulate and control, to have under 24-hour days, 7-day week, 65-day year for the break. Try that. Jesus Christ. And that includes members of the Islamic faith. And those who follow the Islamic faith are into merit-based. You have to earn your way into heaven. This idea of the scales. Well, I did bad, so I have to do more good than I did bad. And Muhammad basically took religion a step backward. We had the Mosaic law, which was based on merit. Then Jesus came along and said the law was put in place to be a mirror to show us our true selves and that we cannot live up to it. And then Jesus offered himself as the atoning sacrifice, takes on the sins of the world, and now we are made righteous through the gift of the Holy Spirit. And it's not our doing, it's a gift given to us freely, grace. And then Muhammad comes back and says, yeah, forget about that. Forget about that. You don't need it. Jesus, those who follow the Islamic faith will contend that Jesus did not rise on the third day. They deny the crucifixion, they deny the resurrection, but yet somehow they claim that Jesus was a prophet. And this makes no sense to me because Jesus prophesied that he would be crucified, that he would die, and that he would be buried, and that on the third day he would rise again. That was the prophecy that Jesus spoke. And yet, and Islam seems to, on the one hand, seems to acknowledge Jesus as a prophet, but at the same time, they deny his prophecy that he would be crucified, die, be buried, and rise again on the third day. Talk about sucking and blowing at the same time. Let's see what Koji Malik is writing. Those people were godless. No way the atrocities committed in the name of God were done by people that believed in God. There is an admonition in the Ten Commandments: thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. There are commentators, there are theologians, scholars who contend that this word, thou shalt not take, that it could equally be translated as to put on the name of God, to basically sit down in God's judgment seat and make proclamation. This is an admonition that we are not to do this. And I think what a lot of people do, and I think there are degrees, and I know I've been guilty of it myself, of sitting down in the throne of judgment and saying, this is what God says. I don't know. I don't know. Beyond what is written in here, I was engaged in a podcast with my friend George Antonios a 3 weeks ago after John MacArthur's passing, and the question was posed, do you think John MacArthur is in heaven? And John MacArthur was something that is referred to as a Calvinist, and he believes in total depravity, unconditional election, all kinds of. There's this five tenets of Calvinistic doctrine, and some people regard that as evil. They think Calvinistic doctrine is a false doctrine; it's leading people astray, and so some were willing to say, "No, there's no way he's in heaven." I pray that John MacArthur is in heaven. I don't know whether he's there or not. If it was up to me, I would say yes, let him in. But that's the way this world operates. Is so many people like to take on the judgment seat and to say what we're doing. God's got my back, and you've got to be very careful. This is my, if I'm loath to give advice, but my one advice religiously is that if you come across someone who has 100% absolute certainty about what they're saying with respect to dogma and doctrine, be very, very leery. Anyway, let's see what Koji Malik goes on to say. The evil by these so-called Christians confirm every day they're using God as a grift, and they are immoral, soulless demons. You shall know them by their fruits. this Sean Foyt, uh, the optics of it was there was a story was published in the National Post, which is a rightward leaning national newspaper publication. They have an online presence as well. Obviously, everyone does. And they reported that Sean Foyt was invited to a RV campground type site that's frequented by poor people, a lot of poor people. And he was asked to come and to lead a prayer service. And he apparently he agreed. And then his business manager went to inspect the accommodations that were going to be provided. Not Sean Foyt himself, but his business manager went on ahead. And this was in and around Fenland Falls. And went and he saw that the accommodations that were going to be provided, this Sean Foyt, he's got quite the production crew. They travel in a large bus with sleeping accommodations and such. And this business manager went and saw the accommodations and felt that they were not adequate, that they were not sufficient, that they were not appropriate, especially for the female members of the entourage of Sean Foyt's team. And so he declined to lead this prayer service. The optics of that are poor. No other way I can frame it. But I would have to see the accommodations that were being provided for myself firsthand before, because they talked to the owner of the RV campground site, and he felt that the accommodations were adequate, very basic, but certainly adequate for, to get cleaned up and to lay down your head and get some rest. So that, we're not the Taj Mahal, but it's not horrific either. And the optics are not good. But let's see what Koji Malik is saying. If they murder, um, we've got another word. Yeah. And defame, I can surely judge. My judgment doesn't kill or harm. Well, it's one of those things. Discernment is certainly needed. And, I look upon individuals like Joel Osteen and Kenneth Copeland. And back in previous eras, there was Jim Baker and Ernest Angley. And I think Benny Hinn is another one. And I am not a fan of these individuals. Am I going to sit in judgment and say that I think they're cast down to hell? No, it's not my place. Am I going to follow them? Am I going to break bread with them? Not that that would ever happen, but if I was given the opportunity, would I? No. But anyway, I've rambled on long enough, 45 minutes nearly. Koji Malik and Whale Oil, thanks for chiming in. Sorry, my streams have been less frequent of late. It's just a matter of summertime is busy. Things should settle back down once we get into September. It's only a month away. In the interim, I'm going to try and get content up at least once a week, at least, if not two, and then hopefully return to something a little more frequent come the fall. But we have an opportunity, Christians have an opportunity to spread the gospel good news to people who haven't necessarily heard the gospel good news of Jesus Christ. And the best way we can show Christ's love is to demonstrate it in acts, not so much in words. Be welcoming, be friendly, and let people know that you're a Christian. And let's see, Whale Oil. He's referencing my t-shirt. Can't read your T. Enough is enough. INWO, Illuminati, New World Order, Assassins Game 36. I don't know what all that's referring to, but my shirt, enough is enough. Open up small businesses now. I got this t-shirt in March, April of 2022 at a rally protesting the lockdowns that took place in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. And Uh, yeah, that's another aspect to this whole idea of the war on Christianity. Uh, only there were lots of individuals pushing back against the insanity we endured for 2 or so years during the COVID madness. And I looked at the churches that stayed open, and I connected with a number of the pastors, with Pastor Henry Hildebrandt in Aylmer, Ontario, who kept his church open. I met with Jacob Riome at Trinity Baptist Church in Kitchener Waterloo. He kept his church open. I met, I went to Alex Klusman's church, City Baptist, up in Peterborough, church open. Uh, Tobias Thiessen went to jail. I met with him, and he kept his church open in Steinbach, Manitoba. Um, no, I did a podcast with Aaron Rock, who kept his church open in Windsor. I don't believe any Ontario pastors actually went to jail. Um, but they certainly got hammered. Jacob Riome's church, Henry Hildebrand's church, the authorities came in and changed the lock, seized the building basically, and forced them to meet outside. And even meeting outside was against the rules. And then they were fined tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think in the case of um, Trinity Baptist, Jacob Riome's church in Kitchener Waterloo, that Jacob Riome himself, as well as elders within the church, were fined in the neighborhood of $30,000 cumulative. And in Henry Hildebrand's case in Aylmer, Ontario, the church himself and the congregants, the fines, I believe, went over $300,000. It was insane. But there was a rationale behind it. These churches were gathering often in the hundreds. I went to some services in Aylmer and Ontario that probably had in and around 1,000 people in attendance. No one was getting sick. No one was dying. And my own view is it was giving the quote unquote the science a black eye. The science said that these type of events, everyone should be getting sick and dying. And week after week, and I'm here to tell anyone, all these churches, Tim Stevens, Art Pulowski, and James Coates out in Alberta, if those churches had experienced the kind of disease spread that we were told would have to happen, if they had experienced it, they would have shut down. The reason they stayed open is because it wasn't happening. What the Armageddon that was predicted was false prophecy. They prophesied that Canada, we were in the first year, just in the first year, we were predicted to have 100,000 people in and around 100,000 people dying as a direct result of COVID. Not talking about someone who's 88 years of age on 20 different prescription medications, can't feed, bathe, toilet themselves with Alzheimer's and dementia, who's just waiting on death's door. No, 100,000 people as a direct result of COVID. We were expecting in the year 2020, Canada was expected to have just under 300,000 deaths that year. So it should have been 100,000 in addition to that. So up in and around 400,000. And we came in, you can check the numbers on StatsCan, came in around 305, 306. And I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Okay, so we had a little bit more than expected. How much of that was due to the fact that mental health, denying people the right to, get sunshine, stay inside, stay indoors, lock down. That was crazy what we went through. But they really used it as an opportunity to hammer the church. Oh, those horrible Christians. Look at them gathering, acting like normal human beings. Oh my gosh. aren't they horrible? They're going to kill somebody. They're going to kill someone's grandmother. Horrible, horrible Christians. And this war against the church is going to continue. This war against the big C church, against people who profess Jesus Christ is Lord. And I'm telling you, we've got to get bold. We've got to get loud. We've got to spread that gospel good news as far and wide. And the people coming into Canada as part of mass migration, invariably, we're talking about people coming from parts of the world. They're coming out of Jesus, and now it's an opportunity, now a chance to share that gospel good news. That it isn't a merit-based system, because guess what? A merit-based system, you cannot measure up. How can you stand in the presence of a perfect and holy God, as broken and as fallen and as sinful as you are and as I am? We all are. It's not merit-based. It is grace. Grace, a free gift. All you have to do is accept it. Acknowledge, confess Jesus is Lord, invite the Holy Spirit in, let the Holy Spirit do the work, clean you up. I heard it framed wonderfully. We're far worse than we like to imagine. We like to build ourselves up to think we're better than we are. Well, guess what? We're worse than what we like to think we are, but at the same time, we're capable of far more than we know. Capable of far more than we know. And that seems to me a decent place to end things. Whale Oil's writing that the Quarantine Act is an illegality against mankind. No one questioned it. You know, it used to be, even the Bible talks about quarantining the sick. Someone who is sick, an infectious disease, and I do believe they exist. Chickenpox, I got it as a kid. It came into the house, I got it. Went from one, and the same thing happened when COVID or whatever it was came into our house. February of 2022, my youngest got sick. A day later, I got sick. The day after that, my wife got sick. 1 2 day nothing burger. The little guy was right as rain the very next morning. With me, it lingered on for 2.5 days, and my wife had it for 2.5 days. It went from one to the other to the other. So infectious disease, and the Bible even says, when someone's sick, you quarantine them, you remove them from population, you remove that person. What happened during COVID was we were quarantining the healthy, someone with no symptoms whatsoever. No, you don't have any symptoms? That's a symptom. And we used a PCR test, polymer chain reaction, which you got to read up on it. Mullins, who invented it, said you should not use this as a diagnostic tool in of itself. You can use it maybe as part of a diagnosis, but don't use this solely. And what do? The Nobel Prize winning inventor of the PCR test was ignored. He's dead, conveniently. But he had said, don't use this just as a diagnostic tool in of itself. And that's what was done. Oh, you tested positive. And Howard Chen School of Public Health at Harvard Medical School said that in the New York Times in August of 2020, said that as many as 90% of the positives could easily be false. It was crazy. At any rate, that's enough for tonight. I'll have more content coming up later. And as I say, once September rolls around, should be able to ramp back up to my previous pace. But in the interim, may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. And he will. And if you are a Christian, start spreading the gospel good news. Share it around. Let's just see what Whale Oil is saying here. My friend, Mark Parhar, he knew the truth and he refused to quarantine, and his neighbor snitched on him. He died from the stress imposed system they imposed against humanity. It saddened me it was eye-opening and sad to see the number of Canadians, and I'm sure it was the same in the US and Europe, the number of individuals who were happy to rat out their neighbors. Used to wonder, we all know the story of Anne Frank and how she and her family were hiding. I think it was in Denmark. I might have the country wrong, but I think it was Denmark. She was being hidden, and someone ratted them out. And you'd sit there and you'd say, boy, you know, I would want to be the one hiding Anne Frank's family. And everyone, oh, yeah, me too. Everyone says me too. And yet there's about 25% of the population, I would reckon, who are all too pleased to stop and rat out their fellow man to an evil authority. Anyway, God bless. Seems to be very unstable. I'm gonna tap out now, and long weekend in Ontario, Canada. Simcoe Day, Monday. I'm off the next few days. I'm gonna be on the road tomorrow, so we shall see you again. And as always, like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. And talk to you later. Took a while.